Please join me in welcoming Imtiaz Hussain, CEO of UK-GCC Private Capital Alliance, and Majid Mufti, CEO of NEOM Investment Fund.
Thank you, Majid. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Imtiaz. Good to be here. Thank you, everyone.
So, Majid, for those who are less familiar, can you please briefly introduce the NEOM Investment Fund and its mission within the broader NEOM ecosystem?
Absolutely. And Imtiaz, thank you so much for having me here. It's my first time at the UK-GCC Summit, and I am actually quite surprised by the wonderful turnout and the quality of the private equity firms and the investment firms all together. And I look forward to catching up with everyone during the networking session. My name is Majid Mufti. I work for the NEOM Investment Fund. I want to speak a little bit about what NEOM is. And I think that backdrop of NEOM is quite important for us to first understand. And then we'll talk about NIF, right? Actually, can I have a show of hands of how many people know about NEOM? Okay, so maybe I skipped that first part.
Quite a lot.
That's wonderful. So just to recap, NEOM is one of the most important projects in Saudi Arabia that's underpinning Vision 2030. And Vision 2030 was launched in 2016 by His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, to transform Saudi Arabia from what it has traditionally been as an oil and gas export country to a very diversified economy that has growth aspirations, right? NEOM sits in the northwest of Saudi Arabia. It is 26,500 square kilometers. It is the size of the state of Massachusetts or Belgium for our European colleagues. And within that region, we are meant to develop 5% of that land. 5% of that land is cutting across different parts of NEOM, some on the coast where it is Red Sea, and it is a beautiful, shallow waters, very much like the Maldivian types. But on the other side is the Aqaba Strait, which is deep sea, and then there's quite extensive sea life there as well. But the topography of that land is also quite interesting. It is barren land. It is greenfield as it gets. And this is something that we want to discuss as it comes into investments into a green field and the challenges that come with that. But NEOM is meant to be a special administrative region, something separate, like a Hong Kong, if you will. So it's not sovereign, it's one state, as the country of Saudi Arabia, but two systems where there is a self-administrative region that lends itself to a much better and quicker environment and regulatory reform that would meet the requirements of the investment community and the business community. The regions, and you may have seen some of the videos that have been put out there. We have Oxagon, which is the industrial city in the south. And just today I've met someone who's actually building a project there. There you are. Good to meet you, yes. And we also have Trojena, which is up in the mountainous region. That sits at 4,500 meters above sea level. Is that right? Yes. And it's quite cold during the winter days. So it's in 3 months, 4 months out of the year, there is snow. You'll need artificial snow to help it, but it can sustain itself. You also have Sindala, which was our first destination that was open to the public. It was launched in October, and that is a yachting destination where most people with yachts in the Mediterranean who make their way down to the Southeast Asia locations pass by the Red Sea where it has beautiful corals, but there's no destinations to stop in. And so between some of the other projects that are taking place in Saudi Arabia, like the Red Sea, you may have seen some of those videos and some of the new promotional areas there as well. That becomes a nice destination for yacht owners to stop by. But the largest and the biggest lion's share of the project of NEOM is the line. And that is a new way of an urban development design that actually removes any cars and vehicles from within the city. So it's a vertical city. It's an incredibly wild concept that is currently being built. and it is being built by the sovereign capital of Saudi Arabia. Because it is so ambitious, you will need sovereign capital, and I think some of the topics that we are discussing is how do sovereigns play in today's market. But that new development is a very audacious way to say, how can we have efficiency from the core? How can we have sustainability where people use micromobility, movement, healthy walking, and having everything within a certain 20-minute walk or a radius be available in such an efficient way, versus the cities. I come from Riyadh today, just flew in this morning. The congestion is unbearable. And you see that in Beijing, in Taipei, in London. And let's be honest, it's only going to get worse. People continue to be, the growing middle class continues to improve, EVs continues to get cheaper, and so there's only one way up, which is more congestion. It comes with that congestion tax and the rest of it, which becomes painful. So that is NEOM as regions. Now, because you are jump-starting a new economy, you need to have an ecosystem that helps thriving businesses be created and landing there in order for jobs and populace to grow. And so we have developed 15 economic sectors across the region, from energy, food, water, media, gaming, biotech. All 15 sectors are working to develop assets, businesses, bringing in technologies through partnerships in each and every one of those regions that have a different type of theme to them, right? So that is the NEOM group. And then NIF, coming back to the original question, the NEOM Investment Fund is essentially the investment arm of NEOM, which helps to put the partnerships and joint ventures together. So that was a mouthful.
Thank you, Majid. So how is NEOM Investment Fund positioning itself to turn NEOM's bold vision into tangible commercial success and global impact?
So that's a good, actually, where we stopped is a good segue into that question, because our role is to help all the sectors develop those relationships. The vision is incredibly ambitious and aspirational, and so we're not kidding ourselves. We don't think that we can do this alone, obviously. We need partners. And so when we put our aspirations out there, but we also put our challenges, there's better people out there, and as I'm listening today from the experts and the panel of experts, better people out there today who can help and come and join us build and develop, right? Putting those relationships and forging those partnerships together is where the NIF comes in. Sometimes we're putting joint ventures together. Sometimes we are acquiring certain capabilities to help turbocharge our own gaps. We are also, we have an allocation for a venture capital fund. And so we've done VC activities in terms of acquiring and supporting and turbocharging technologies. But we are a strategic investor, right? And so our ambition isn't so much the return profile, it is the technology transfer and turbocharging and catalyzing that technology to become something that is first scaled, first piloted in NEOM. We also do large infrastructure projects, so PPPs, BOTs of energy, water, TMT or broadband capacities. These are things that we also do. So what we've done is we've centralized all the transaction capabilities into one organization called the NIF, the NEOM Investment Fund. And through that organization, we're supporting all 15 sectors in terms of their needs.
Fantastic. Thank you, Majid. So the sovereign investors, they are no longer just capital allocators. They are becoming more active architects of economic ecosystems. So what, in your view, makes sovereign wealth funds uniquely equipped to play that role today?
Well, they have capital, so that's good, a lot of it. But it's also characterized as patient capital, which is needed, right? Now, most sovereign wealth funds, or some sovereign wealth funds, depends, I mean, they have, their mandates are very much aligned to a different investment thesis or strategy or a national agenda. Norges continues to invest into very diversified types of businesses outside of Norway. And that is called, maximizing or preservation of wealth. It's a good strategy. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you come to, say, a PIF, the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, other funds in the GCC, even in China, they have a national agenda. In the PIF, it is ecosystem development. And so more lately, we're seeing that the PIF, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, is putting its capital into its own turf. And that is something that helps the national agenda in terms of GDP growth, jump-starting new regions, jump-starting new ecosystems or new industries or new companies. Sovereign capital is patient, but it can also take a little bit more risk than maybe the private sector. And so when we talk about a new industry, semiconductors, for example, very expensive, high capex, but becomes a strategic imperative for the nation to have, and to have that security of supply. And so anchoring those types of investments will help create a ripple effect on other supply chains and value chains that would support it. And so sovereign wealth is required to really meet its own agenda, but the risk appetite, the extent of the capital, and the longevity of how long they're willing to wait on investments and returns or paybacks makes it a very unique asset class altogether.
Thank you, Majid. If we look at different sovereign wealth funds, PIF, they are over $1 trillion of assets under management. And if you see most of the private equity funds like KKR, Apollo, Brookfield, by 2008-9, they used to have only 30-40 billion dollars of assets under management. They are all now 600-700%, 600-700 billion dollars of assets under management. And what is the profile for the PIF that is making this growth, over the last 10-12 years? Where are they investing in? What are the industries? And what is the regional focus for the PIF?
I mean, traditionally, Saudi's sovereign capital used to go into, was risk averse, right? It went into US T-bills, and it was standard. There was a standard treasury bill acquisition, and money waited there, and there wasn't really much churn coming out of that. In fact, there is still some capital out there. That has changed substantially. And so that's what Vision 2030, and so it is incredibly important that there's an alignment between, at the sovereign wealth fund level, between the nation and its ambitions, and between how you're using that capital to drive that, and that drives the entire nation towards that same objective. And so if everybody's rowing in the same direction, that becomes hugely important to create impact. And so the diversification of PIF's capital has moved into creating companies that they are ultimately putting out and floating into the public market. And so, participation from, the general public into those successful companies is a way for the Sovereign Wealth Fund to contribute. And so they've done, in fact, I don't know if you hit it, Humane is a new company that was launched just last week, which is an AI company and the AI national champion for Saudi Arabia, as an example.
Thank you, Majid. And what does that looks like in practice at NEOM Investment Fund?
I think, touching on our role in terms of ecosystem development. So what PIF is to the base economy, NIF has been created to be that regional wealth fund for the NEOM, right? Our focus is to jumpstart that economy. And to do that, we are looking to do something very similar in terms of investing and bringing in large anchor investments and large anchor businesses. The semiconductor example is one that we've designated NEOM to be the location of where we plot those relationships with the actual manufacturers. And so we're talking about fab, we're talking about silicon carbide fab, we're talking about packaging that comes with it, but we're also talking about fabless. And fabless is the design of the chips. And these are startups, these are designers. So when you combine large industry and manufacturing along with the innovation and research and innovation that comes alongside with it, it's not just chugging out a manufacturing thing. No, there's continued innovation alongside that. And that becomes very important. So when we think of our investment strategy within a certain segment or a market or an industry, we're looking at it holistically in terms of how can we make sure that this thing thrives, what types of supply chains are required, what type of value chains are needed, is this something that needs to be on the coast, outside, what value proposition is going to make it win. For example, Oxagon will be 100% renewable energy powered. There's no industrial city in the world that has that. In fact, the entire NEOM region is meant to be 100% renewable energy. So with that other theme, there is an energy mix that is required, as well as storage. When we talk about 100%, that means at nighttime, you need to push out that renewable energy. That means storage becomes incredibly important. So one of the topics or one of the types of storage is pumped hydro. Pumped hydro today, we're looking at a $3.5 billion project where we take water up into the mountain and pump it into the evening down, and that creates a lot of energy. That type of project is something that we're putting out to the market in the form of a PPP, right? And this is where public-private participation becomes hugely important, so that we're not bearing the cost of the entire CapEx. We're saying over 25 years or so on. This is something that we wanted the developers, along with their financiers, to come and do, because they do it better, and the financiers are going to keep it much more effective and honest in terms of its return profile.
Thank you, Majid. You know, we met in World Economic Forum in Davos as well, and we spoke before, and now you also told us about the investment as a tool of industry creation. So can you share an example where NEOM Investment Fund's capital is being used not just to fund innovation, but to capitalize an entire economic sector from the ground up?
So I'll continue. I think the theme today is also around renewables and sustainability. The topic in the previous panel came up around hydrogen and whether that's a good idea or not. I'll tell you our story. We have a green hydrogen project that is 25% of the way being built. It is an $8.6 billion project. It is a three-way joint venture between NEOM, Aqua Power, which is a national champion in renewables, and Air Products. And this project was $6.4 billion project financed, twice oversubscribed because of an full offtake agreement of that green hydrogen to go to Japan, where the market is. That is a real example of our experience with hydrogen. And so when we think of an energy mix, we think of hydrogen, but the discussion I think that was also brought up was a chicken and egg discussion. Do you bring up the hydrogen first, or do you wait for the demand? I think this is a common theme in energy transition in general. And sometimes you need to push on both sides that you have more hydrogen, it makes it cheaper and more interesting for people to actually have the offtake and create the demand. CNG, compressed natural gas has been around for over 20 years, which also came up in the discussion. But we're talking about new renewables, green. That project isn't just a standalone. We are also looking to localize electrolyzers and having that supply chain and value chain. As it relates to other renewables, we are putting 2.2 gigawatts out into the market now, and another 4 in the next few years, and pumped hydro storage and battery storage. So when we say we're going to get to 100% renewable energy, you're talking about generation, you're talking about storage, you're talking about how do you have the technology that makes the whole system regulate very well, and make it more efficient in terms of how do you use that generation back and forth. All of that together with the technology and innovation from the VC community that's coming in, that's part of the investment thesis. So each and every one of those sectors has its own investment thesis that we go after. Things that we are building on our own, things that we are working with large multinational companies, and things that we are looking for the entrepreneurial community to help innovate and create.
Thank you, Majid. So public-private partnerships are increasingly central to long-term economic transformation. So where do you see the most meaningful opportunities for collaboration between sovereign investors and the private sector?
We are, so on renewables, just to pick up on that, we have, we started off by doing EPC, engineering, procurement, and construction that we would take on. Then we realized that there's better people out there that who can do it. PPPs became the approach. And so these are 25-year contracts that we're putting out there. And I think what is really important is that the private sector is out there. The interest is there, the developers are there, but they need someone to help guarantee. So going back to Greenfield, the region doesn't have a population today, and that is one of the largest challenges. So to jumpstart a region, you need to have some sort of guarantees to support projects until such time that the population comes up, and then you are able to step down from those subsidies. And we talked about, or we heard subsidies being stepped away from here in Europe. Where do people put their capital? We talked about, or I heard, safe havens. But the discussion that I've heard so far is still talking about where in traditional geographies that most people in this room are used to. I guess what we're trying to say here is that there are other geographies that are wanting to do the very same thing that you are wanting to put your money into, but it's not in your traditional backyard. It sits somewhere else in the world. And if we think about energy consumption globally as one pool, we are still doing a benefit to the world by reducing that consumption. But we need to look beyond the waters, beyond the regions, beyond the pan-Europe in order for you to have that opportunity for that capital to go in. I was quite impressed by the number of firms that are focused on sustainability, energy transition, infrastructure. But I think that, we need to get you to see what type of projects we are having out in the region in general, and in Saudi Arabia in particular, that is backed by sovereign capital, that could make it more interesting and easier for your LPs and your capital to come into.
Thank you, Majid. So how does NEOM Investment Fund makes a compelling case for global investors, founders, and industry leaders to partner in its ambitious vision?
Again, when you come into a new region on your own, it's hard to navigate. You're not sure where the opportunities are, and the risk alert is always up there. So having a strong partner that's willing to put skin in the game alongside you is very important, and that's what we do. So when we come into, or when we invite people into a business, the entire NEOM project, as an example, is too big for anyone to comprehend and get their heads around, where do I invest? But we piecemeal it, we ring fence it, and we take a business plan to make sure that it is bankable, but it's also investable, that there's equity return type of profiles. And that's what we come into together, and we usher in the right people to take an opportunity and take a look if this is something that they want to join. So NIF is really there to bridge the gap, but I would also say that we also need to galvanize the investment community into the opportunities that we have.
And what are the unique advantages that resonate most with both investors and the founders?
Let me say this. Investors are everybody's looking for a growth story. And today, when you take a look at the world, where is the growth? Europe is okay. We'll keep it there. Yeah.
Yeah, we know that.
The US is the US, they have their own capital. Asia is self-sustaining. And so where do people look to put their money? So everybody's looking for a growth story, but they're also looking for an aspirational growth story or a value proposition that speaks to them. So we're not talking about defense or we're talking about building new cities, we're talking about real estate development that hasn't been built before, we're talking about sustainable transition. These types of investments appeal to many of the people, the individuals and the fund managers and founders in the room. But you also need it to be in a stable location, so politically stable with ground fundamental economics that can back it up. Saudi Arabia is a G20 country today, and it has that sustainable gravitas, and it also has that ambition and that growth that it wants to be able to bring partners into. We also have specific projects that are very aspirational, ones that we don't have solutions for, and the ones that we require people to come into. And so if it's a new sector, or if it's a new region, you're going to find some incentives or subsidies. So while subsidies are weaning off here in Europe, they grow into a market that's looking for partners and developers to come into. And that's the opportunity. The quicker people are able to come in, the quicker you're able to get some of those early incentives and subsidies that are available. Over time, obviously, like any other place, those die away.
So the word mostly, Majid, they are driven by short-term pressures. We want to show to our shareholders and the markets that we want to generate returns for our investors. And how does NIF stays true to generational investment horizon, especially when outcomes may take decades to materialize?
Look, I think that's par for the course. When we build NEOM, it's not a 10-year project or a 15-year project, it's a 20-year project. How long did Dubai take to become Dubai? I get asked the question, when will NEOM be done? When is Dubai done? Dubai's not done, it's a city, it continues to thrive and grow. And NEOM is just at the early stages. And so when you're pioneering, that's where opportunities are. That's when you're helping to shape it. I mean, we talked about how investors are interested. Innovators are very interested. Entrepreneurs are very interested because the challenges that we have, they haven't faced before in any other place. When you talk about a vertical city, how do you move people from one place to the other in modes of transportation that haven't been developed yet? I mean, many of us love scooters because you can just get on one and very quickly glide to where you need to go, right? But what pods? How do you go from one floor to the other without using an elevator and wait for it 15 minutes until it shows up? These are some of the real challenges that we're looking for solutions for. And so there are things that we need short-term type of returns on as a technology, as an innovation, but then the next milestone is how do you make it commercial? And there's large infrastructure projects that typically take their normal course of 25 plus years that come with that. And then there's real estate development. A lot of that capital the sovereign wealth is putting up now to help de-risk, but anybody can come in and say, look, let's monetize this asset, we'll come in, we'll take it. You know, a Brookfields or even a consortium of smaller investors are all welcome to come into it.
Majid, thank you very much. I'm sorry we are running out of time. Thank you very much for being with us today. And look forward to see you in the next summit.
Thank you. Thank you, Imtiaz. Thank you, everyone, for your attention.
Thank you, Majid. Thank you, Imtiaz. That was very interesting.